like 10 days since we were together, so I've missed you. Good morning.
Oh, Brad, nice to see you. Very nice to see you. Thank you very much. Yeah, well, I'm sorry because I bumped you off our scheduled call of a couple of days ago, so it's my fault that we're slightly later. It is 10 days. It's been a while. How
Well,
how are things going for you? What have you been up to? How's
you
the
know
family,
what?
first of all?
So first of all okay. Son's gone back to uni to see his girlfriend. He was very excited. Actually, it was quite funny. He doesn't listen to this podcast, but he was meant to go on Monday. And on Sunday night, he comes down and he says to me, points to his lip, and he says, "What's that?" And I said, "Oliver, that's a cold sore." No, he'd been burning the midnight oil. He'd been doing his final assignment. He'd been up all night for like a
Yeah.
week. He was just run down, exhausted. He's got himself a cold sore. He's like, "How do I get rid of it?" I go, "Well, look, I've got some stuff upstairs. Don't worry." He goes, "But I'm meant to be seeing, you know who." I said, "Well, you might want to postpone that." Anyway, he had to postpone it. He was gutted, and every day, like, said, "Do you think it's okay to go now?" I was like, Anyway, finally on Wednesday night, it had disappeared, and he's like, "Is it okay?" Yes, it's okay to
Yeah.
go.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So
Uh,
he's happy. I know he's happy because we haven't heard from him since he got back there.
excellent.
So he's super happy, and yeah, so everyone's well, and business is full on. Today is Friday, so it's a nice day of coaching. Actually, really lovely. Do you know what? Last Friday, my wife sent me a text message. I was out in my cabin at the back of the garden, and she says to me, "Hey, tomorrow, 2 o'clock, no kids, no dogs. Let's go on a date."
Wow, that's a lovely thing. Yeah.
Right? And we realized that for 3 months we hadn't done that.
Wow. Yeah.
And we went out for this lovely date. Actually, we went somewhere we would normally maybe even take the dogs, although it was a new place. We found an ancient woodland like 15
Yeah.
kilometers away. And we went for a lovely walk, sat under trees, climbed them as well.
Yeah.
Um, and we went on this date. And it got me thinking how, a lot of couples, a lot of businesses are starting to recover
Yeah.
now. And I wondered whether maybe you and I could unpick the concept of what recovery looks like
Yeah.
for people now.
Oh, yeah. That's a really good. That's a topic. That's a topical one, isn't it? Because back to the old side. One of the themes that we're dragging through these sessions, I think, is this unusual times of COVID, and we see that in different places in the world, people have gone through and getting into recovery, and we're both in the UK, aren't we? So we're things are beginning to open up, and shops are there, and we're beginning to get back together with some of our friends in the garden, and we're back to real life. And some people are treating that, totally embracing it, jumping back in as if it hasn't happened. And other people are very nervous about it. And that's exactly the same in business, isn't it? Because some of my customers are, absolutely, they're gearing up, they're getting back to it, and they're up and running in certain parts of the world. And in other parts of the world, it's still very much closed down and locked down. So these sort of global teams where they've got to collaborate and they're in different parts, it's difficult to juggle all that, and it's difficult for those people who are having the same situation, because people look at it, can and behave and think about it very differently. Some people are excited and jump in. Some people actually nervous and don't want to do it, understandably.
And when I hear you say that, I got a message on LinkedIn last week. Somebody posted on a work anniversary that popped up for me. I thanked them. How are you? And he wrote back, "Yeah, all good. Strange few months, busy for the directors. We have forced everyone to come in on Monday." That was the language.
Wow.
I didn't respond to it because I was a little bit a little bit annoyed by the language, actually. But imagine if you were forced, and I'm sure there are some companies that are doing this, right? When I was mentioning it at the dinner table, Charlotte turned around and said, if someone forced me to go in, I'd resign.
Mm.
And I was thinking about it. This, again, this recovery phase, we need to be sensitive to people's needs. This phrase that everyone's comfortable using now is psychological safety.
Mm.
And as someone who works in that field, in coaching, in psychology, psychological safety has always been something very sort of important to me. How do you create that space where people feel intimacy with you to want to share? And I think there's another learning gap that's been exposed for me, for leaders, in that we can't just presume that everybody wants to come back.
Mm. Totally, absolutely, absolutely right. And yet we know in these global teams, there are people that are desperate to go back. So as soon as they get that email, they'll be great. I'm in. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
Why didn't this happen 2 weeks ago? And they're desperate to have that connectivity. And yet other people, maybe they're, for multiple reasons, they don't want to go back in. Maybe they're nervous. Maybe actually they realize they can be more productive working from home and working differently. So I'm wondering, in your work, with the best leaders that are providing this environment, which is more psychological safe for their colleagues and those who work with them, what is it that you see them doing? What are their behaviours? What are the tips that you would give?
Do you know, I think that is the question, right? And I have seen some really strong leadership behaviors. There's one guy I work with in Italy. And of course, out in that Med region, they suffered a lot, right, during this process.
Massive.
And his view was that he wanted to bring not his leaders around the table to talk about what they were going to do. He wanted to bring his people around the table to tell the leaders what they needed from the leadership. He said,
Oh, cool. That's cool.
right? So too often his view is leaders sit down and we talk about how we're going to run the business and this is what we need to do and blah, blah, blah. Actually, he felt that in this moment, what he wanted to do was hear from his people. So he just pinged everybody. He got a little bit of backlash from his leaders saying, hey, heads up, we could have known about this before. But he said, no, actually, I want everyone to feel exactly the same. I want us all around the table, and I'm going to share first how vulnerable I feel. And then I want us to come up with how do we operate as a business region. And you know what, Richard? They have had 3 1-hour meetings that he said were more productive than any of the other Zoom calls and Blue Jeans calls that they've been having where they've talked business, because he felt as if they were in recovery. They were talking about safety. And he had people from facilities in that call sharing what it felt like to be front of office, welcoming people in. And he had VPs and directors sitting on that call who were saying, look, my wife doesn't want me to fly just yet.
Yeah. That is super, super cool. I heard you say 2 things. So my question was, what tips would these great leaders who provide this environment where those that work with them feel safe so that they can be authentic and share and show vulnerability. I asked you, what would be the tips? And you actually said 2 things. You said, actually, I've got a story. And you said, actually, a leader showed vulnerability himself, how he was or she was feeling about it. So that's the first one, showing vulnerability yourself. The second thing you said was actually engage the teams about how they're feeling and what they need.
And I think from that, actually, as a leader, we can really learn, because we talk about how leaders should have vision, right? They're meant to live their life backwards. They see the image and then they breathe life into it with their teams. And I think this is what this guy has done in Italy. So as a tip for the top, go out to your teams and say, how are we going? This is the perfect time to use the we.
Yeah.
It's not how do I make my team feel safe? The tip is how do we create safety for us as a team? And it's a slightly different reframing. And when I asked him how did he come to this, his answer was really quick. He said the first thing he learned in Italy when all of this was kicking off was the community spirit and how the community really can come together and be stronger. And why not leverage exactly the same belief? Now, he goes, yes, we look to our leadership, our politicians for leadership, but they often let us down, he said. So rather than assuming we all had the answers, let's go to the team and get them.
I think that's a great one. And where that, so there's three things you said. I love your what was it? Top tips for the top. I like that. I like that. Actually, you said model vulnerability, number one. Two, engage teams. And actually, and you're engaging them around the question, which is the third thing, is how are we going to create the safety where we can do the things we do. And then you were doing that with, by sharing a story of a team who went through that during COVID in northern Italy where they struggled. And I was thinking, where else have I seen that? And I've seen that, or I've heard stories in sort of a military context. But then you come out and you say teams who have to face crisis. So in a medical context, in accident and emergency, where you have a patient that comes in and they have to assess. And you see on the screens, and when I talk to my friends who are absolutely in that environment, they say trust is implicit and non-micromanagement. So everybody in that team has a really important job to do, and they need to trust their anaesthetist. They need to trust the orderly to get the patient to you. They need to trust that the place has been cleaned. They need to trust the senior sister. They need to trust to do the jobs, so that allows them to do their thing. So it's that trusting, and they're not micromanaging them. So trust them to get on with the job. Take a risk, almost take a risk in your people to let go a little bit more and stand back. And what I hear and what I see in a more of a traditional business sense and a team sense is where you have leaders actually modeling those two things. You get this discretionary effort. People feel far more valued. They feel trusted. They go the extra mile. They're prepared to make a mistake, but then learn from it and move forward. So some great tips, and I loved your story of Northern Italy, and that rifted into a couple of other stories.
I wonder though, Richard, when you say that, especially about the non-micromanagement, I sense there may be a gap for leaders. So I'd be interested in your view here as a coach, as a facilitator, because not all leaders have embraced, virtual working. There are some who still struggle with the fact that they have to trust their people to get on with it. You talk about that implicit trust.
Yeah.
And I've never met anybody in an interview who, when you've asked them, hey, how do you want to be managed? And they say, oh, I want to be micromanaged. Yeah. That's how to get the best out of me. No one ever says that. So I wonder, how do we help people create that implicit trust? How do we help people step away from micromanagement, lean into that trust more? Because we're saying it as if, this leader in Italy, he's worked really hard in leaning into trust. In fact, go back a few years and you could saddle at him that he was a micromanager, right? He's learned how to step away. I'm wondering, when you observe people developing and growing into that kind of a leader, what do they need to do? Because we can't just assume everyone steps away from micromanagement, trusts the people in their team, the equivalent of your Anita story. How do we help them move into that space?
Yeah, and actually before that, I think there's a conversation, to be quite frank, about, there are some people that you do need to manage, and there are some tasks that do need to manage. So I think from our I think people like us need to be very careful not to be too preachy to people who are doing a proper job in a real tough
Right.
organization. They're accountable for results, they're accountable for tasks being done, they're accountable for timelines. And it's very easy for us to preach, you need to trust, you must stand back, you need to give. And we know that there's fantastic things that come from that. And yet, there are things that you need to be on top of. And you need to drive for results. So there's a little bit in me that's sort of a warning signs. This sort of totally letting go and non-micromanagement, which is I was espousing before. We need to put it into the real world scenario. So having said that, if we believe that, we want to, create this environment where people are more trusting, we need to, I think it's a theme through a number of our conversations, is we need to model it ourselves. We need to model the ability to be able to embrace things, to get them wrong and to learn from them, be vulnerable, and say sorry when we've got things wrong. That's what I would say. But I'm slightly nervous, as you can see in me.
You're reticent here, aren't you?
I am a bit.
But I hear you, and I think, I raised the reticence because just yesterday I was on a reflection session with a leadership team.
Yeah.
So this is a leadership program with 25 people, and we take 5 of them in small groups for a couple of hours once a month to reflect on their leadership experience. It's a lovely way of doing some group team coaching. And yesterday in the group there were 3 guys from finance, and we were talking about a webinar that was lined up on strategic awareness in a couple of weeks' time. And this guy, he just laughed, and it's from South Africa. And he goes, it's a great date, Brad. He goes, you choose our end of year date. Perfect. And so my instinct was to come back and, hey, listen, we either find a way or we don't. So don't worry, it will be recorded. And he said, yeah, but Brad, the fact is that our business leaders will push us to get these things done. We're measured on results.
Yeah.
And here you are saying, we've just spent an hour, little breakout discussions on coaching techniques to try and help people develop goals and plans that are really doable, right? But their response is, but you don't know what that looks like in a finance team, Brad. Because we work on a weekly, monthly, quarterly cycle, and I can't afford for one of my guys to just go and mess up the P&L ledger.
Yes.
That's not how it works in our business, he said. And I said, well, are there ways that you can look for, exploring where there's a chance for them to fail and learn? And he just laughed and he said, not in this world.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I hear your reticence, and I think not only is it reticence, actually it's really true. We could sound really preachy saying, well, all you need to do is lean into trust.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I want to lean into trust, Brad, but I get measured if we fail. So,
So here we are. We're in the world of the reality. Look, so we can give these wonderful hints and tips about how leaders create psychological safety, and I've got 6 on my list now, and I think the reality is something that I know you talk about with your teams, is that it's about being adaptable, and it's about being flexible. You choose your moment. You choose your moment. We aim for trust. We aim to give people psychological safety. We aim to show vulnerability. We aim to not micromanage and empower and let go. And yet, we need to choose our moment. And I think the lesson for me is let's try and spot those moments more often. Because going back to your example, which was a great challenge from your South African participant, was some things have to get done at deadlines, and
right.
that's all right. They have to be done. And yet, another time there will be moments where they can practice being more vulnerable, and the leader can let go, and the leader can be more vulnerable. So it's not a one or, it's about when you choose it. And I think the insight that you've created for me is try and spot that moment more often. If you're not even trying to spot the moment, you will fall back into the old way of micromanaging, driving through the normal way of doing things. So I think everybody's got the opportunity to create psychological safety, whether they're a manager or they're a participant or a team member, helping their leaders create that environment by spotting the opportunity to raise it.
And actually, when you say that, it instantly pings this thing in my head that says, are we looking for those opportunities? Are we really? Are people looking to see, would this be the moment I could do this?
Yeah.
And I think it requires an honesty and an openness with the self. It
Yes.
requires actually a vulnerability with the self. You have to trust your team that you can be vulnerable in that moment, and it might go wrong. And actually, it exposes you as well as them, because I don't believe anyone goes to work and wants to make a mistake.
No.
People want to deliver, they want to do a good job, right?
Yeah.
So as the leader, maybe it's almost like my responsibility. You said it before, the phrase you coined was, to lead by example. We've got to model the way and let people know this is explicitly, right? This is how we're doing it. This is what I'm looking to do. Maybe even I'm speaking extemporaneously here, so I haven't necessarily thought it through, but maybe it's for me to say, listen, Rich, over the next month, I'm going to be looking for opportunities to kind of really lean into getting you to try things differently. So they may work, they may not work, we may succeed, we may fail. I just want you to know I'm looking for these opportunities now. So call me out if it's bad timing for you. But if every time I bring something to you, you say, no, now's not the time, I'm going to call you out on it. And
Yeah.
almost it's like a little contracting thing
I
that we
think
do.
that's I think that's a great tip. Your question was, are we looking out for them?
Mm,
And then why should I look out? Why should I look out for them? Because there will still be some wonderful uh, op, op, optimistic skeptics out there
right. Nice
listening in,
phrase.
listening into this, and I would always go back to, you do this sort of thing not for the want of being nice. You do it as well as achieving good results.
Right.
So we know, if we go back to the last conversations we had, my little triangle of how do we become successful. And there were 3 dimensions. They were equal. One of them is around results, one of them is around process, and one of them is around relationship. And the relationship bucket is where trust lives. If we have high degree of trust, that gives us a higher likelihood of achieving our results. So all the studies point to the fact that the organizations and teams where they have high psychological safety, where they have an ability to be able to collaborate and be authentic, they generate better results. So if you're a leader who are listening into this, like I might have been, slightly skeptical in my old way, actually, if you're interested in achieving greater results, actually in a more timely way, that will then help you spot the opportunities to practice some of this at the right time where it's appropriate, where you can. And try and do it, a couple more times this week.
And maybe actually, because of the environment we're working and living in now, we actually have those opportunities being presented quite regularly, actually.
Totally. Yeah.
Because, we're having those meetings, we are having to come back together. We do need to have discussions about creating environments where people want to work.
Absolutely right. That is exactly an argument I was making with a new client, and it's a new opportunity that's popped up. They said, Richard, but you don't understand the environment we're in. We are going through an integration because we've merged with another company. We're going through transformation because we've got a new leader who's building a new vision, a new operating model, a new thing, and we've got COVID. And I said, what a fantastic opportunity to embrace COVID, because it's forcing us to have to collaborate and work differently and trust other people. So, let's spin it in a genuinely positive way and embrace what these opportunities are. But coming back all the way back to the beginning of your topic, your conversation is, as we're going through this sort of evolving process with COVID, some people are going back and some people are, where are we, and how do we create the psychological safety? The world is never going to snap back.
No.
And some people are going to want to embrace it, and some people are going to be less mindful of it, and they will want to go back. And that is the challenge that is presenting as to leaders right now that we've been talking about. And the theme of psychological safety, with those 6 or so tips, and learning, thinking about when we want to practice those, and then spotting the opportunity to practice those. I think that's the sort of the sort of snail trail that we've gone through in our little conversation here today.
And I like your idea, because if we have the image of your triangle in mind, relationships, results, and process, it doesn't actually matter which of those you tend to lean into more, because right now we have the opportunity to lean into the relationship piece. We've got the opportunity to change the process piece. We've got the opportunity to keep driving results. So actually, you're right when you say, the phrase you use is, are we looking to spot the opportunity? Maybe we just need it in the front of our mind's eye, that every conversation might be an opportunity to lean in a little bit more. To try something new, to spin it and reframe it as, maybe this is an opportunity. We're eternally positive, so we look at it from that point of view, but maybe that could help others to lean a little bit more or a little bit less, depending on their style.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. That feels like we've come a nice little circle there once again.
It always feels as though we reach a pause point, and it just hangs over like a Dallas end of season cliffhanger for the next conversation.
I like your lens of Dallas. That's amazing.
Oh, maybe we should have a whole episode on Dallas and the leadership styles of what we observed in that 1980s soap drama.
Gracious. No, there would be a thing. Brad, lovely to see you. Thank you very much indeed.
Always a pleasure. Loved our chat. See you next week.
Yeah, take care. Ciao.
Bye.